All right. And we're back with another episode here. We have Fran with us today. He is a very prominent content creator over there on other social media platforms. Has a very large following on TikTok. He's gaining traction over there on YouTube and many other platforms. We had the pleasure of meeting again at Swell this year and just kind of circled up. We've had a lot of conversations since then about some fun things. And so I thought it'd be really cool to have him on the show. Appreciate you being here with us.
Thank you, Jake, for having me in your show and being able to connect with your audience. And really glad to be here. And yeah, looking forward to this cool conversation. I'm sure the audience is gonna like it.
Yeah, I think so too. So for my audience, they may not have any context of who you are, how you got started, or how you got this big following. Would you mind kind of stepping back and just running them through how you ended up where you're at today?
So, well, basically, almost 4 years ago or 5 years ago with COVID, like everybody, I started searching investing opportunities, and as everybody, I started with Bitcoin as an alternative to traditional investments because of the ROI. So yeah, long story short, from Bitcoin you go to Ethereum, from Ethereum you go to XRP, and once I discovered XRP, it's like the normal thought process everybody does. You start with Bitcoin, and then you start learning stuff about how it's not the perfect. Well, it's more. It's there's better technologies. Just to summarize it, so you do the learning curve, and suddenly you see. I just saw that there was a gap in XRP specifically with what was happening with the financial system in Spanish-speaking content creators and English, because there were a lot of content creators in English, but not that many in Spanish. Now there's gladly a lot of Spanish content creators, but 3 years ago, not that many. So basically, the idea was, well, in marketing, is called blue ocean. So basically, the idea is that when there's no competition, well, you probably know this right very well. Blue ocean is basically you search some area where there's no competition, and because there's no competition, there's no blood. When there's a lot of sharks in the ocean, for those who don't know about marketing, brief explanation. If there's a lot of competition, there's a lot of sharks, and that means that there's a lot of
Blood in the water.
animals dying on the sea, and there's a lot of blood. So the ocean is red, and it's not a blue ocean anymore, right? So basically, in Spanish, there was a huge blue ocean, no competition, and that's why I grew so fast. It wasn't. I mean, obviously, there's some discipline to it, but it's just basically grabbing on TikTok specifically an audience that wasn't being served. Nobody was paying attention to the Spanish community. Everybody was speaking English. So I matched that gap and I grew fast just because of that simple strategy. So basically, that's the long story short. I started talking about geopolitics, finance, digital assets, and all the merger of all these different topics. That is a huge topic, huge topic in Spanish, and just giving my subjective opinion, because I'm not right on everything. We're all trying here to give a little piece of what is happening. And basically, yeah, after that I extended to YouTube, to other social media, and yeah, long story short, I was able to attend on to Ripple Swell 3 years later, meet you in person, and a lot of other people in person. Really interesting event, Ripple Swell. Let's see what happens next year. And yeah, that's basically how I ended up in specifically was with XRP. What made me put the highlight on XRP was that once the lawsuit started, I saw Rosy Rios abandon the Treasury of the United States and join Ripple, the board of directors. So that was a kind of a aha moment. I said, okay, if they have a lawsuit and she is joining, she definitely must know something that I don't know. So I'm going to pay attention to this project. So yeah, long story short, if people follow what has happened in the last few years, you're pretty aware of what is happening to this point.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's incredible, man. Excited for you and all the traction that you gained. And like you said, just underserved markets. I I think people are hungry for financial education and people that have the discernment to come out and speak about these things and understand them and be able to communicate that in a way that resonates with them. And I think you've done a fantastic job of that on your channels. Really, combing through the research and providing good, insightful, fact based information for people so that they can make the best decisions for them and their family on how they're going to invest in this asset class. And I think you continue to do that. How frequently are you putting out content? Is it just kind of, as news breaks type thing, or you have a regular cadence where people can go find you?
So I try to be on YouTube specifically as consistent as possible, on a weekly basis, at least 3, 4 times. And I'm also starting to incorporate lives, which more personal, and you start answering questions to people. On TikTok, I have it a little bit aside for now. I have to gain traction again because I've lost the habit. But yeah, basically, people can find me on YouTube where I'm constantly or more frequently creating content. And yeah, that's basically the main on Twitter also. But yeah, that's basically the main source of where I'm focusing right now.
Well, so you have some interesting other things going on. Obviously, being a content creator, I have this too, right? Like people reach out to me with their projects. They have some cool stuff, that they're working on, whether they're building on this network or another one, and they're looking for sometimes it's advice, sometimes it's capital, sometimes it's an introduction to somebody else that they think would be helpful. What all have you seen out there in the market that you're excited about right now that people are building?
So, well, basically, one of the things I'm searching or I'm interested in is yielding products for XRP without having to sell, basically. So that's why we also got in contact in part of because of that. Um, 3 years ago, I started talking about this theoretical thesis. One of the things I also do is I have an academy where I teach people about digital assets, about their utility, and I theorized about this concept of using these assets as collateral without having to sell it, because it's how people use, well, at least all around the world, people did basically use assets instead of selling them, having to pay taxes, and then reinvesting them. You basically search for cash flow investments that give you cash flow, take out a loan, and then you have from one single asset two different cash flow based on different investments, right? So I talked about this, and I talked about this 3 years ago, where these structures, you know it well,
Yeah.
didn't exist. So now, long story short, one of the things that I think is the most interesting part for XRP investors right now is, or at least where I'm putting my focus, is ways of generating yield with the less risk possible. I don't think there's zero risk in life in anything you're doing, but at least mitigate the amount of risk you are taking. Uh, we've seen it with, well, basically all the news, all the bad news that comes out of crypto, FTX, and the hacking of smart contracts, all the other things that I'm sure it's gonna evolve and be better in the future. But there's still room for improvement.
For sure.
So one of the things I'm basically focused is also seeing how Flare is developing, and all the other synergies that are being created right now to offer clients, the audience basically, solutions that are tailored to their specific goals, and most importantly, that are aligned with the audience, because that's a problem. Sometimes you can find other content creators. I don't want to name names, but people would be surprised if I don't know how it is in English speaking countries, English content creators, but in Spain at least, I don't want to say names. You can see misalignment between the audience and the content creators.
Well, and again, it's something I talk about frequently. I want to make sure that we're in alignment with what's best for us and whoever we're working with, and we both make money together, right? You don't want to put yourself in a position where I don't like zero sum games where one person wins and one person loses. Um, you want to provide people tools and opportunities and ways that they can navigate things that, like you mentioned, are in their best interest. Sometimes that's selling. Sometimes that is the best way for them to, accomplish their goals if they're short term, or there's just certain situations where that might be the best option. But I think overwhelmingly, most people that are holding these digital assets are similar to yourself. They want to be able to leverage them. They want to generate cash flow. They want to be able to borrow against it, and then rehypothecate, or not rehypothecate, but take that equity out and then go do something else with it. Whether that's live their lifestyle, make another investment, but continue to cultivate and build wealth over the long term versus selling the golden goose and then having this cash and ending up a lottery winner where you buy a bunch of liabilities and go broke. So that's really cool that you're educating people on that and looking for those opportunities. We got to, sit down with Flair while we were at Swell, talk to Hugo and his team for a good while,
There.
which was, yeah, it was great. They're working on a lot of cool stuff on chain. And then to your point, there's still risks out there. I think we're going to see in 2026 the real convergence of DeFi and TradFi, where they're able to bring these smart contract capabilities and on-chain transactions inside institutional frameworks. And we'll also have the regulation around that to be able to fortify it and to have the adoption by the banks, right? Until we have that, bedrock of how they're going to treat these assets and what's okay and what isn't, they're going to just stay out of this lane. That's why I think, you mentioned Blue Ocean. We, we have a fairly large Blue Ocean that we're in with what we do for the private client services and wealth management for XRP or digital assets at scale. Um, there's nobody else that was willing to do it, and it was a problem. Like you said, you saw, look, I want to learn about this stuff. I'm going to go learn about it, but now nobody else is here speaking Spanish that I can relate to and communicate well with me. You solved a problem for yourself, and then you're able to help a bunch of other people, which is really cool. So, you got Doppler, you've got Midas, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of other people. You got Evernorth also, the treasury company that Ashish Burla and David Schwartz have kind of pivoted over to, along with Michael Arrington. They're going to be seeding a lot of these DeFi protocols on the XRPL with the $1 billion in XRP that they've raised. And a lot of the amendments are starting to come forth now that will allow for smart contract capability directly on the mainnet. I don't know if hooks will ever get migrated to the main net or not. I've talked about that in the past. I think that that's a potential outcome. XLM was able to implement, Sorban smart contracts without delaying the settlement or changing that type of stuff on that chain. So I think it's feasible that the XRPL could have, lightweight smart contracts to be able to execute things for banks. And now that they've got these other amendments moving in for the institutional adoption with permission domains and permission dexes. They've got digital ID and credentials. A lot of the stuff they were talking about at Swell. So on that, what was your favorite panel there at Swell? Did you have a couple of them, or what one struck you the most?
So I would say that, well, it's difficult to pick a winner because there were many very good panels. We had the CEO of NASDAQ opening Ripple Swell on day one. We had the head of digital assets of BlackRock. uh, Funny enough, the building of BlackRock was just one block away from where Ripple Swell was being
Yep.
created. So that's interesting. We had also the digital assets advisor of the White House. But basically, I would say that um, for the context we are living right now, I would say that the highlight, I think by far, was probably, well, two things I would say. The first one is that I liked hearing the head of BlackRock, and I think it was Fidelity, saying that, recognizing that they have been working on this technology for more than 10 years.
Mhm.
It's funny to hear yesterday Larry Fink was saying, "Hey, I was wrong about Bitcoin," and I don't think he was wrong. I think he has too many NDAs about anything, everything, right? So I think he has to say he's not lying. He's just saying what he can't say, he can't speak actually. And the other part was recognizing, or at least, yeah, implying that the first use case of Nasdaq is going to be um, liquidation plus trade settlement. So if you're an XRP investor, that is interesting because, well, you just drink from the cup of R3. So that's an interesting topic. Yeah, basically those two highlights, I think, should make people think about how they're changing the perception from, at least from the media. We've seen how media has been bashing this ecosystem for many, many years. They still do it. Maybe they're starting to change right now, but suddenly it's not that bad, right? And suddenly we see how they're creating strategic reserves, how they've passed the Clarity Act, how Mika has been approved in Europe, how they're gonna pass the Genius Act Clarity in a few weeks. And we're seeing how everything is changing. And I think at the end, and putting this together with the side event you just mentioned, the first day with Ray Fuentes and all the well, Flair and so on. I think the fun thing about your conversation with Hugo is that at the end you both need each other. I think that's the point, right? We're going to see how TradFi and DeFi are going to work together. I've had the privilege to assist to many digital assets events, Paris Blockchain Week, throughout the years, and you could literally see how the audience has been evolving and how the panelists have been evolving. So, for at the beginning, it was kind of a confrontation between crypto and banks. And if you're an XRP investor, you knew at some point there's going to be a merger of both
Yes.
ecosystems, both worlds. So there's going to be a collision, not a yeah, well, a collision, a kind of a merge. Collision is too maybe a too hard word to use.
Convergence.
A
Yeah.
conversion, exactly. So you can actually see how at the end over the years, specifically in Paris Blockchain Week, they ended up recognizing that, hey, maybe we need both. We need each other in the same way, because you're gonna have access to a huge opportunity if you just stop trying to go against banks, go against central banks, commercial banks. It's a thesis that it's not very intelligent, and even in Ripple Swell, the CEO of I think it was Galaxy, he recognized that the thesis of Ripple at the beginning, everybody thought that they were crazy, and now they are starting to understand why they were doing what they were doing, right? So even him, that he thought that crypto was going to rise, and this is his words, not mine. He thought crypto was going to rise and banks were going to disappear. He said, "I was wrong. There's going to be a merger." And I also had the privilege to assist to Davos last year, Web3 Hub, and they basically, one of the CEOs of an exchange called LCX, he was advancing that this year was going to be a year of record for mergers and acquisitions. And long story short, we've seen this. I think we're going to see
Call.
much more, much
Mhm.
more. I think we're going to see banks buying many, many exchanges, even cold wallet companies. And that's going to be like the final step, I think, in the ecosystem, when we see how banks have basically bought the whole ecosystem. Maybe not the whole ecosystem, but large chunks of the ecosystem.
Yeah, I've talked about that. So I think that there's going to be a large liquidity crisis. A lot of people have probably heard the theory on that. Um, I think that that'll involve Tether. And when it does, there's going to be a huge opportunity for a lot of institutions to step in, make some acquisitions, and buy a lot of these exchanges up for pennies on the dollar. And you'll see a consolidation for the people that are solvent and do have, assets that are going to exist on the other side of, uh, this transition. I think the majority, and Brad Garlinghouse has said this more times than I have, but he thinks that, crypto's 99% of it goes to zero. So, I mean, that doesn't leave a whole lot of projects. Today, if it was 99%, there'd be 500 blockchains. There's about 50,000 cryptos out there that would be left. I think it's probably even more than that. I think we probably are only left somewhere between 70 and 100 viable protocols or networks that do see mainstream adoption and implementation where they, exist past 26, 27. I think there'll be a huge consolidation in the space, but the convergence is here. And to your point, I mean, we've done this the clunky old fashioned way, right? So we've spun up the hedge fund in the US, you're able to put up your assets in kind inside the hedge fund. We're the only option that is off chain right now. Everybody else is doing it on chain, which is awesome. I love to see the innovation take place and people, curating this stuff in a way where people can participate at scale. And that's what's difficult with traditional stuff. Um, it's clunky. We do a securities offering. You have to be a accredited investor, and you're able to put your assets up in kind. We've had to, work with legal counsel here domestically to sort through all this stuff and make sure it's done appropriately. And then we had to readapt the infrastructure, and we had to, cultivate partnerships across 5, 6 people and businesses, and in order to be able to facilitate this at scale. And even then, when you're managing 500, 600 LPs in a fund, that is a lot of paperwork. It's a lot of back and forth and communication. With a DeFi protocol, if you're able to just submit it and stream real time returns, all of that's on chain. All of the accounting's on chain. Today in the US, they still make you keep separate accounting records. You have a fund admin and you have an auditor and all the things that are required in order to operate a hedge fund at scale. So, our costs on the hedge fund are $1 million a year or more just to spin this up and do it the compliant way that's, you know, feasible with the way that things sit today. But on chain, a lot of those inefficiencies become streamlined, and I really do look forward to the day where we're able to tokenize what we've put together on chain and create, um, democratized access to a lot of these things for people that, just haven't been able to participate for one reason or another. And I think that's going to come on the other side of, price appreciation. Because it's funny to me, like you mentioned, you go from Bitcoin to Ethereum. Developers go where the liquidity is,
Yeah.
right? And so that's why we've seen such a proliferation there on Ethereum over the past, really the last decade, is because that's where the liquidity was, and people became proficient with Python and Solidity and built out these smart contracts that are EVM compatible. And it's really become kind of the standard that's out there. And that's why I think it was so important and imperative that the XRPL added the EVM sidechain. That is literally the bridge, what allows all of this other talent that's been cultivated to come to the XRP ecosystem and start building things here that are interoperable with XRP for settlement, but still have, the more advanced smart contract components that are capable with the EVM or the Ethereum virtual machine. So, did you weren't able to attend Swell in 23?
No, it's my first time, so I couldn't see. Well, I did hear the ex-governor of the Central Bank of India saying that this year he saw much more people in jackets in suits rather than previous years. That's something I also noticed in other events I've been able to attend. So, how was the previous years?
Well, so the reason I mentioned 23 is they had Polygon there, and the CEO of Polygon spoke at Swell in 2023. And so that was really interesting because it was before the EVM sidechain had ever even been proposed or come out. And, it's just interesting timing of things like you talked about. It's not like all of this is public knowledge, but there's obviously people that know what's going to happen in the background.
So I guess following the same reasoning you just said with Polygon and the EVM sidechain, I guess we should expect some kind of announcement from this some CEO that attended as a panelist last year. We'll see who it is. I do agree with you with your thesis of liquidity, the liquidity crisis, right? I actually started creating 3 years ago. My thesis was trying to detect where was the liquidity crisis going to come from, and I've covered. I don't know how many scenarios I've covered. I've covered natural disasters, cyber attacks, all kinds of scenarios that would, because they need some kind of excuse, right? You can't. You say it's oil, right? The carry trade, and suddenly I started creating all this content based on liquidity crisis, right? And even the regulators, and I covered it, showing the documents, showing how regulators are explaining that there's a problem in the financial system, that they need a solution, that we would see how the payments would be halted, and all the consequences, right? So, and suddenly one day I hear your domino theory video, and okay, this guy has some knowledge, has a very specific timeline that's really interesting, and I agree. It's very possible. I also think there's going to be a supply shock. It makes total sense. I mean, we've seen. Yeah, I think it was yesterday or 2 days ago. I don't remember anymore. The first 30 minutes of the ETF of Bitcoin was over over 1 billion in volume. 30 minutes with Vanguard. So apply those metrics to XRP, knowing that there's not that much available. Once all these ETFs start launching more abruptly, right? So yeah, I don't know exactly how it's gonna be, but I totally agree that the thesis that you are explaining makes sense, and I definitely think they need an excuse to say, "Hey, it wasn't our fault. What just happened wasn't our fault. We need some kind of political tension, geopolitical event, some kind of excuse to cover the fact that the financial system is broken, and they need the way of solving it is going to T+0 and making settlement instant. So yeah, that's basically. So it's funny that we kind of created the same content with
Yeah.
different theories, but yeah,
Well, and again, I don't think I have all the answers, but a lot of what I originally stated in the domino theory has come to pass. I mean, we got stablecoin regulations, we have ETFs here. The Clarity Act hasn't been passed yet. Tether did not meet the stablecoin regulations, but they gave them a grace period. The reverse carry trade is imminently unwinding, and they will need, real time settlement of the back into the stock market. What did the president of Nasdaq say? That is the first place that they're going to use this technology. So it's just been really
definitely.
interesting. Yeah.
I think there's a guy you should do a podcast with, and his name is Michael A. Gayed. I think it
Yeah.
is. He's
Yeah, I know
on
mine. I
Twitter.
talked to him Saturday.
Okay, okay. Because
Yeah.
I have been following him for a long, long time, listening to how he explains, well, the carry trade basically. And I thought it would be interesting to for you guys to meet up and have a chat because it's going to be an interesting topic. It's funny because there's a whole bunch of content creators who are very knowledgeable on the old financial system, and they're kind of saying it's the end of the world. You can see Robert Kiyosaki, you can see George Gammon of Rebel Capitalist, Eurodollar University, another guy who's very knowledgeable, but they miss the missing link that is digital assets. It's not the end; it's just a continuation. And so it's funny to be in the intersection, watching all these content creators, very clever. Don't get me wrong; they're super knowledgeable. They know more than me. I mean, they are very clever. They know their stuff, but they still don't see the gap with. They still don't see the where it's going in regards to digital assets. It's more evident now that stablecoins have been approved and they're starting to think, okay, there's something going on with digital assets, but they still don't see the end game. It's kind of the ending words of Brad Garlinghouse at Ripple Swell, where he said, hey, we're buying all these companies with having an end in mind that we want to promote XRP. We want XRP to be the liquidity. And it's what people don't understand. People criticize it because they're selling XRP to fund their business, something that is pretty normal, and it has its explanation. It's for the good of the ecosystem, but they still don't understand what the end game is in relation to the whole process. They're just waiting for evidence, and I think it's that if they wait for the evidence, the opportunity is going to disappear. That's what people are not seeing down the road with what is happening. They're just seeing the problems. They're not seeing the solutions of what regulators have already built. And they're just saying, hey, there's an alarm. I agree there's an alarm with the financial system, but they already have a solution.
Yeah, they've been working on it for multiple decades. I mean, that's BlackRock's whole deal, right? Like that's why they rolled them in, and they've been supporting everything and repackaging the debt and making sure things have been stable for really kind of keeping the economy on life support the last 20 years in reality after '08. um, and they needed a way out of it, and they've got that. You know, the only way out is to revalue something. We've seen that in the past, but with digital assets, you just need to be able to drive liquidity into it and start using it, and then you can really, it's a positive feedback loop because you can take all of these traditional assets and tokenize them, and that adds more value to the blockchain that you can then draw debt against, and then you can refinance that over time because you're drawing against something that's continually expanding. That's not fiat money; it's actually backed by something real. You're borrowing against the growing GDP and economic value of something that really exists. So yeah, I feel it's surreal is the only way I can really kind of explain it. Because to your point, you know, Robert Kiyosaki and George Gammon and all of these guys that are economists that I revere. Like I think that they're extremely intelligent. They put together fantastic content and explain things thoroughly. And I hold them in a high regard. So it's difficult for me to understand how they don't see this, and we are able to, you know? Um, and I don't know if it is the libertarianism that they have, which I love, by the way. Um, I just I think, you know, they hold large amounts of Bitcoin and they've done well with that. And if I had got on to Bitcoin early, I think I would also have a hard time seeing this opportunity for what it is and how this transition is gonna take place. So I'm kinda thankful that I missed that boat. But at the same time, you know, again, I just have a hard time comprehending why they can't also see what I've presented. Um, yeah.
I think it's a problem of philosophy. I mean, they I think it's an they are in with specifically the digital asset space. XRP represents kind of the opposite of what people want with Bitcoin.
Yep.
Uh, it, not on a technical level, because the white paper of Bitcoin is actually XRP. People have forgotten, but he was talking about peer to peer. He was talking about electronic payments, peer to pay, peer. So he wasn't talking about store of value. That doesn't appear in the white paper at any moment. So I think Bitcoin has been hijacked by this philosophy of very knowledgeable people who I agree, central banks, it's a legal theft to steal people's savings with inflation and so on. I agree with all of that.
Same.
But to think that you're gonna to really think that the possibility exists to end with to destroy central banks, I mean, that's not I mean, that's not a realistic approach. I'm sorry to burst that bubble, but there's this philosophy gap or this attachment to this idea that they want to destroy central banks. And I agree with the reasoning, but there's it's not going to happen. So what actually is going to happen is the opposite. I think um, they're gonna update the whole system. They need a dot kind of for the email, but for moving value that hasn't been established yet. It's gonna be established. There's not gonna be only one winner. There's gonna be multiple winners. Some will have more value than others. That's an interesting topic. I'm looking forward to see how it's gonna be post utility. I think there's gonna be a few surprises. I'm glad. I hope to to have some of those surprises. But yeah, I think it's just a philosophy barrier, an attachment to something they want to happen. They want to see happen, but it's far from happening.
Well, when you in a negotiation with somebody, again, like we talked about the zero sum game, and that's really how the world's played for the past 100 years. Like there are winners and losers. Markets have winners and losers. But when you come brazenly in opposition to the central banks, that's not going to go well for you. It would be much better to partner with them and then get them to adopt this technology at scale. And then over time, break down and disintermediate the pieces of that that aren't good. Because it is good infrastructure. People are able to pass value and exchange value fairly simply today. Now, there's delays and fees and intermediaries, and you don't necessarily have full control over your own assets if they're held with an institution. But on chain, those things are possible, right? So if you could utilize all of the infrastructure that already exists today, and then over the next decade, disintermediate that from inside, I think that that's Ripple's vision for XRP and the thesis over the long term. It's really the same goal that both sides have. It's a fair world for everybody to be able to participate and pass value and exchange things similar to barter over the long term, where, I'm able to trade you my chickens for your cows, but, there's an actual like exchange mechanism that has no counterparty risk and can settle real time. Money will flow like currency, right? Like that's the whole premise behind the name. Right now, there are banks that sit in between, some of those flows, and you have to go to the bank and then bounce off the bank in order to get to the next one. Um, but anyway, yeah, I'm excited for the next 3 to 5 years. I know a lot of people, like we mentioned, are concerned with the systemic crisis that is looming here. I'm very confident that with this technology and the implementation of it, we're going to see a V bottom, and it's not going to be a prolonged depression like would have persisted otherwise if they didn't have a way to, increase the velocity of money and spur GDP and remove inflation. It would be bad. They're absolutely right. And you would, it would go back to like a Mad Max scenario, and nobody wants that either, right? So there needs to be a path forward, and I think they've carved that here. And we're all going to get to participate. Those that can see what's going on.
Just to add to what Jesus said, also last year when I went to Davos, I had the opportunity to assist to one of the panelists of Citi, and he was sharing his experience on how the banking industry had played too conservatively with internet. They saw it as a speculative tool. They didn't embrace it really. And the consequence of that is that suddenly you see Google, you see Alphabet, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, these giants come out of nowhere. And he was specifically saying that they have learned really, really well the mistake of not embracing internet, and that they're not going to do the same mistake with digital assets. And if you put that together with what the president of Banco Santander said a few years ago in regards to digital assets, well, not in regards to digital assets, but the banks are not worried about the crypto industry. They are worried about Facebook. They are worried about Twitter. Twitter has a user base of 600 million users. What's going to happen once Elon Musk announces distributed ledger technology for or wallets on your user profile, and suddenly you can send money on your social media? Because that's going to happen. The question is, who are going to be selected for that uh, use case? And that's the competition of banks. So they need to embrace this technology to lower their costs and be able to compete against Facebook, because after Twitter, all the other social media platforms are going to do exactly the same. It's going to take time. It's not going to be immediate, but they're going to do it. You're going to see wallets. You're going to be able to send money on WhatsApp, on Facebook, on Instagram, on YouTube. So the question is, how much market share are these tech giants going to take out of the banking industry? And the digital assets is the tool that the banking industry is going to use to be able to compete against them.
Well, they're going to have to. And there was so on Capitol Hill when I was there when they were passing the Genius Act, we were advocating or lobbying with the congressman to be able to get it done. Um, they talked about, putting one thing or another in the Genius Act. One was going to be interest that had to be paid to the end user of the stablecoin. Or and if they did that, then they wouldn't allow, Google or Amazon or Meta or these other people to launch stablecoins. They would make it exclusive for banks. The bank said, no, we want the interest. We'll go ahead and let them also issue stablecoins. So, yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting. And the user base of Meta is 3 billion people globally. Like that's a whole nation state. And that's when they were going to pass Libra as their, currency. US government said, "Whoa, whoa, you you aren't doing that," because they knew it would absolutely do what you're talking about and disintermediate the banks, and they would lose market share. So I think they had to wait for them to catch up. I think we're here now, and I think moving forward, we're gonna be able to see, you know, more competition for consumers is good, right? It tends to drive prices down and create efficiencies in markets. It's not so great for the people participating in those markets, like you mentioned, the red ocean at the beginning of this. But for the users and people at the end, it actually provides a net benefit.
And I know you're concentrated on XRP and you don't talk about many other projects, but just so the audience knows, I am also pretty concentrated on XRP 90%, not 100% like is your case. But any case, all the team that was in front of the Libra team of Meta, they left. Obviously, they had to leave, and they built Sui. So, in case people
Mm.
want to check out that project, I think they have a team that is very well connected, very knowledgeable, and yeah, let's see how that company also that blockchain operates.
Yeah, Rob Powell's and somebody else that I listen to infrequently. Um, he's obviously on the board. Like he's advocated for Solana and many of the other things that have done exceptionally well over the past 3 years. So he's another voice in the space that I think is very intelligent. We actually have the same CFO. So um, yeah, SWE, there's HBAR, there's XLM, there's XDC. Hash is something that I've talked about, which is the token for provenance. I actually did a full video on all the different networks that had traction across multiple different verticals for tokenization of real world assets. And obviously, I'm partial to XRP, and that's my only position. But I'm with you. There's going to be a lot of winners over the next, 3, 5, 10 years. And as the culmination comes together here at the end of 25 and early 26 for XRP, a lot of my focus will shift to some of those other verticals and assets. A lot of the content will still be centered around crypto and what's emerging here in the applications. But um, yeah,
I I agree. There's many projects, but one of the reasons I also focused on XRP is because the base for everything basically is going to be payments.
Mhm.
Um, Even if you whatever scenario you look at, you're gonna need payments, micropayments or wholesale payments. So if you're searching for, I don't know, if you're thinking about the metaverse, you're gonna need payments in the metaverse. If you're searching for payments for robotics or AI agents, you're gonna need payments. So basically, every interaction is gonna be based on payments, and if you get that right, I think kind of the way of viewing this is Amazon started with books, and Ripple is starting with that part, but we can't quantify how big the financial market is now, but we can't quantify or we can't imagine how many billions or trillions of AI agents are going to be flooding the labor market digitally. After a few years, we'll see that how that incorporates to robotic humanoids who are going to be using also when they interact or need to buy something, they're going to be using payments also, plus UBI that's going to be necessary. That's going to be also based on digital assets. So I think we can, even though we are on top of the ecosystem, I think we don't grasp the how big this is going to be. That's why I also talk about just holding on the assets because we can't see what is being built on how we can intuitively guess how it's going to be. But I think the best strategy is just buy, hold, and search for income streams.
yeah, I completely agree with you, and I also champion what you just stated there. There's far more applications for this stuff that's going to exist on the other side of it than people can comprehend today. Very similar to like the analogy I give people for this is traditional mail or postal versus email, right? Postal, like if you were really getting it back in the day, you were sending like 20 or 25 letters a week. Today, I get 20 or 25 emails in the first 10 minutes of my day. So the volume of payments and payment applications and the scale that this is going to move to is going to be exponentially greater than even I probably comprehend. I think it'll be in the pentillions of dollars, which far exceeds the global GDP today. So, thank you for taking the time. I've really enjoyed the conversation. If people want to go follow you, what's the best way for them to reach out or go check out your channels?
Well, basically, they can find me on YouTube under Fran de Olza. It's gonna be in Spanish. I'm sorry.
It's
I
good.
did I did do my first interview with Ray Fuentes in my channel in English, so I'm starting to bring people from the English speaking community. Hopefully, more people soon.
Yeah,
And yeah, basically, Fran de Olza on YouTube. People can find me there. Or if they want to reach me out to write on Twitter, it's called It's Coach FAO. And yeah, just send me a direct message and I'll be glad answering your questions.
that's awesome, dude. So
And it was an honor.
go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say thank you for having me in your channel. It's been a pleasure connecting with you and yeah, being able to speak to your audience. Yeah, and that's it basically.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for being with us. So, if you in the audience have a buddy that is Spanish speaking, and that's their native language, uh, send him over to the channel. Like he's going to be able to communicate with them a lot better. Like I poquito español, uh, very little, not enough to actually be able to communicate or be funny in another language. So really glad to have other people out there advocating for the space that can communicate with people and help. Right, like we that's genuinely what Fran and I want to do is just help as many people as we can participate and understand what's going on and take advantage of the opportunities that are out there. So, with that, we'll have his links in the comments below. And thank you again for taking the time and being on here with me.
Thank you also, and congrats on all the work you've been doing. Keep up the good work. And yeah, looking forward for uh, having a chat soon.
Thank you, brother.
Take care.